Some men are pilots. A select few become legends. In the sweltering heat and lethal skies of the Vietnam War, one name embodied the spirit of the American fighter pilot more than any other: Robin Olds. You are watching rare restored footage featuring the Hawaii-born pilot. When he arrived in Southeast Asia to command the 8th Tactical Fighter Wing, he was already a throwback to another era. A West Point graduate and a double ace from World War II, he had proven his mettle in the cockpit of the P-38 Lightning and the P-51 Mustang. He had seen the dawn of the jet age, flying the P-80 Shooting Star, and even commanding the 1st Royal Air Force Exchange Squadron, flying British Gloucester Meteors. He was a warrior forged in a different time, now tasked with leading a new generation in a new kind of war. Taking command of the F-4 Phantom unit, he found morale wavering, weighed down by frustrating rules of engagement and mounting losses. Olds changed the culture overnight. He led from the front, taking the most dangerous missions for himself and fostering a spirit of aggressive excellence that earned his unit the nickname the Wolfpack. His famous, proudly non-regulation mustache became a symbol of this maverick defiance. His crowning achievement was a stroke of tactical genius called Operation Bolo. Knowing the North Vietnamese MiG-21s were targeting bomb-laden F-105 Thunder Chiefs, Olds laid a meticulous trap. He equipped his F-4 Phantoms with the electronics and call signs of the F-105s, mimicking their flight paths to lure the enemy into the sky. The MiGs came up, expecting vulnerable bombers, but found a sky full of lethal Phantoms. On that one day, January 2nd, 1967, the Wolfpack destroyed as many as 7 MiGs with no American losses, crippling the enemy Air Force and rewriting the rules of air combat over Vietnam. Olds's fight was not confined to the cockpit. He was a blunt and often outspoken critic of how the war was being managed from Washington. He saw firsthand the flaws in early air-to-air missile technology and the deadly consequences of restrictive policies that gave enemy fighters sanctuary. He believed the war's political micromanagement was costing American lives, a view he would later express in frank testimony to government officials. Robin Olds was more than just a triple ace with 17 victories across 2 wars. He was a brilliant commander, a leader of men, and a timeless symbol of the warrior spirit.
He was the son of a World War I pilot. His earliest memories were the sounds of aircraft starting in early morning. 2 years before the United States entered World War II, he tried to enlist in the RAF, but at 17 was too young. A year later, he went to West Point, where he played football and made All-American. He was one of the most natural fighter pilots his instructors had ever seen. A kid who seemed to meld with his plane into a single being. On his first combat mission, he shot down 2 German fighters. By the end of the war, he destroyed 13 German planes in the air and 11 and a half more on the ground. He sat out Korea, but in Vietnam flew more than 150 combat missions. He was a hard-drinking, hard-cussing officer who didn't bother to hide his contempt for the limits politicians had placed on the war.
I think he ruffled feathers and made people very, very uncomfortable, because often what he was saying was absolutely true and it was going against what people were expecting him to say.
He was nonetheless so well respected by the Air Force brass, they made him Commandant of Cadets at the Air Force Academy, in hopes that he would pass his passion and tactical brilliance on to the next generation of Air Force officers. He is Brigadier General Robin Olds, and he is a legend of air power. Robin Olds was born in 1922 in Honolulu, Hawaii. His mother died when he was 4 years old, and his life was dominated by his father, Major General Robert Olds, himself a flyer and a confidant of Billy Mitchell.
Well, his father, General Robert Olds, was one of the pioneers in military aviation, and Robin grew up with that background. He grew up with people coming to his house every night or, on weekends that were the pioneers of aviation when military aviation was just starting. So he got indoctrinated pretty early.
He spent most of his youth living on base in Langley, Virginia. His father played a prominent role in convincing a skeptical bureaucracy that the country needed to spend more money on combat aircraft. Olds remembers the uproar among flyers when President Coolidge asked, in all seriousness, why the Army didn't simply buy one airplane and let the pilots take turns flying it. But mostly what Olds remembers is growing up among the camaraderie of those early aviators in a world that seemed to him to revolve entirely around airplanes.
When I was a little boy, the first noises were engines of airplanes warming up pre-dawn. And I could tell one engine from the other, even when I was 4 and 5 years old, to my dad's delight. And I'd sneak down to and watch the aviators, watch the pilots. And then I remember once, years later, I ran into a fellow who had been a sergeant there at Langley, and he told me the story of going into a hangar once. There was one plane sitting in the hangar, and no one was around, but all the controls were moving. And he walked up to the airplane and looked in this open cockpit, and there I was, down in there. I was about 6 years old, working the controls for all I was worth.
While there was never any doubt that he'd end up a pilot, his father insisted he get a proper education. But when the Germans invaded Poland in 1939, Olds showed up at the Canadian embassy and tried to enlist in the Royal Air Force.
They laughed at me. That we have to get permission, your parents' permission. So Dad had just moved to Washington. I went home, and he came home from work. He said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Dad, I want you to sign this piece of paper." Well, it took about a week to scrape him off the ceiling. And back in prep school I went. That was the end of that.
After graduating high school, Olds considered enlisting and trying to fight his way into the Air Corps. But the rules at the time made that route difficult. And, having watched reserve officers struggle to gain a regular Army commission, he opted instead for West Point. He had, he admits, a romanticized view of what his career would be like.
I'm going to go to West Point, and I'll have a regular commission, and I'll fly airplanes, and I won't have to work for a living. And so I went to West Point.
There, he says, he learned the most valuable lessons an officer can learn: to associate and trust the people around you, to take orders, and to ignore fun and games. He impressed his teachers with his drive and focus, which was also evident on the football field. He played tackle, and in 1942 made the All-American team. By then, of course, football seemed an almost irrelevant diversion. The Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor, and the United States was no longer dominated by pacifists who believed we could stay out of the war. Olds took his basic and advanced flight training at tiny Stewart Field, just north of West Point. From the first time he put his hands on the stick, he knew flying was exactly what he was meant to do.
You're the brains, you know, you're the blood. The aircraft are the muscles. And each explosion of a cylinder, each whirl of the prop, every movement of the aircraft translates itself into you through your body, and you react, or it reacts to you. You don't think, now I'm going to do this and pull back and go up there. You're there. You don't think about it. It's instinctive.
2 months before Olds graduated, his father died. Robert Olds was only 47 years old. The flyers he had grown up with were scattered around the world and could not attend the funeral. So Olds graduated from West Point an orphan. His family was the Air Corps his father had helped make, a force that had fought for its very existence while young Olds was growing up. It had flowered into a full-fledged strategic force, the only force in the early months of the war capable of striking significantly at the enemy. Olds learned to fly P-38s in Arizona and California. He and all his classmates were anxious to get overseas, to get into the battle and test themselves. But they were caught in what Olds refers to as a catch-22. The Army wanted the Academy graduates to go overseas as flight commanders, but didn't want to promote pilots to command who didn't have battle experience.
And then once it really soaked in that we weren't going anywhere, my friend and I, Al Tucker, went down to the L.A. Fighter Wing headquarters, found a sergeant who said, "You guys really want to go to war?" I said, "Yep." He said, "Where do you want to go?" I said, "I want to go to England." He typed down. 20 minutes later, we had orders. So the moral of that is, if you want to get something done in the service, go to the sergeants.
Olds and his partner were off to England and the war. It took them less than a week to get there. Olds had never been so excited about anything in his life. Lieutenant Robin Olds arrived in England with the 479th Fighter Group in May 1944. In only a few days, he strapped into his P-38 and flew off with his squadron for a mission over occupied France. And there, the squadron flew around in circles, not bothering to attack anyone.
And I'm sitting up there getting more angry, cussing in my oxygen mask, looking down, there's a train, there's trucks over here, the airfield there. And all enemy targets. This is prior to D-Day. Hey, why don't we do something?
After a few up-and-down missions, Olds and his wingman cooked up a scheme to get themselves into combat. While flying over the French countryside, Olds radioed his commander that he saw a moving train and was going down after it. "Roger," came the reply over the radio, and down Olds went. He made 2 passes at the train before his squadron arrived to back him up. And as he was swinging around for a 3rd pass, when an angry voice on the radio ordered everyone back into position at a safe altitude. Back at the base, the major in command of the mission confronted Olds, wanting to know why he had disobeyed orders by attacking the train.
"Sir, I called you. I said, this is New Cross lead. This is Blue 3. I got a train at 7 o'clock. I'm going down. Will you cover me?" And you said, "Roger." He said, "I didn't say Roger." You know what that's called? Gotcha. Gotcha. It was my wingman, and we had set it up.
While the strafing run on the train might technically have counted as Olds' first combat, his first air-to-air engagement occurred a few days later. Assigned a night mission, though they were not equipped with night fighters, Olds ended up separated from his squadron. Rather than returning to base, he continued on with the mission, flying alone toward a bridge in eastern France. He found the bridge just as dawn broke over the continent and was on his way back to base when he spotted a couple of planes on the far horizon.
And don't ask me to explain, but you know immediately, enemy. Yeah, something tells you, enemy. 99.9% enemy. But that 1/10 of 1%, I cut them off through the field, came up underneath and behind, and there were 190s, 2 of them. So we went roundy round, and I shot them both down.
Because of a design flaw in the P-38 gun camera, Olds expected there wouldn't be definitive records that the dogfight had even taken place. He returned to base sure he was going to be in trouble for going on the mission alone, and decided not to even bring up the kills for fear that no one would believe him. Sure enough, as he climbed out of his plane, his commander was waiting for him on the ground. The commander was mad, but not very. A bomber flying high over the battle had reported the kills. On his next mission, his flight came upon a large group of German fighters bearing down on a group of American bombers.
So we pulled up behind them, and just as I was about to fire, both engines quit. Because in my excitement, I'd forgot to switch tanks. I said, what the hell, I fired anyway. So I've always, all these years since, had laid claim to the fact that I'm the only fighter pilot in the history of aerial warfare that shot down an enemy aircraft while in the glide mode.
He got his engine started again and returned to battle. He got 2 more kills that day. In only 2 air-to-air engagements, Robin Olds had shot down 5 enemy aircraft. He was officially a fighter ace. He was quickly promoted, first to captain and then to major. By the end of the war, he was one of the most famous pilots in the world, a dashing hero with an outsized personality and a total of 24 and a half kills, 13 in the air, the remainder German aircraft on the ground. Not long after the war ended, Olds was summoned to Supreme Air Force headquarters in France. When he got there, he was shown into a room that was filling with what Olds refers to as a book of heroes of the war. Generals, Medal of Honor recipients, half the staff of the Supreme Allied Command. All were awaiting the arrival of their host, General Karl Tui Spatz. Spatz had been an old friend of Olds' father, a pioneer military aviator who had been in charge of American air operations in the European theater. When he walked into the room full of heroes, Spatz greeted Olds first. Before he spoke with anyone else, he ushered the 22-year-old major into a side room for a private chat about Olds' father and the young officer's career.
Gave me some advice for the future about me firsters, mate tours, deadwood, dedicated people, you know. Then he said, look, here's, and he pulled out a wad of francs. He said, here's about $500 I won off poker from those fellows out there at the other room. He said, my car is waiting for you out front. Go into Paris and get lost, which I did.
After the end of World War II, the Army Air Force took its rakish, heroic fighter ace and assigned him to coach football at West Point. Robin Olds reported as ordered, but wasn't happy with the assignment. Thankfully, it lasted only a few months, and then he was transferred to California to fly the Air Force's first combat jet, the P-80 Shooting Star.
It was like flying a jet-powered glider. Wonderfully acrobatic and agile, you know. No nav equipment. I mean, everything was still dead reckoning, but fun.
Olds helped form the Air Force's first jet acrobatic team, a precursor of the Thunderbirds that toured around the country, building the profile of the Army Air Force in support of making it into a separate branch of the military. He was flying a performance in California when his wingman, Pappy Hearst, failed to pull out of a dive and crashed.
And I wanted to land way down at the end of the field, but they made me taxi right in. There was a little lump of people. They didn't know which one of us. They just knew one had crashed. And I had my visor down, my oxygen mask on. I didn't want to get out of that airplane because his wife was standing in that little crowd. But finally, I put my head down, took my helmet off, and stood up and backed out. And I glanced over my shoulder. She was dead gone.
Olds reformed the group as a team of 4 and went on flying shows for the remainder of the air show season. He also planned a flight from California to Washington, D.C. for lunch and back in a single day. He and his wingman got lost in clouds over West Virginia. When it seemed like enough time had elapsed, they dipped out of the clouds to see where they were. They were right over the Washington Monument.
We hadn't asked anybody's permission to do this or told anyone that we were going to do it, but the press got hold of us, so they were flight following us by telephone, you know? And the Pentagon heard about it, and they were furious, but, you know, especially the information people, because they hadn't been cut in on it.
The publicity stunt worked. The idea of flying so fast that you could cross the continent, have lunch, and be home for dinner captured the public imagination. In 1947, the Congress voted to make the Air Force a separate branch of the service. Olds missed the Korean War. He had recently married Ella Raines, a movie actress, and was convinced that she or powerful studio people she worked for pulled strings to keep him out of combat. He revamped gunnery training for the fighter forces in Europe, but was angry that he missed the war and came back, he says, with a chip on his shoulder. Assigned to the Pentagon, he started fighting what was then the prevailing wisdom that in a nuclear age, fighters were irrelevant.
Well, my boss, a 2-star general in the basement of the Pentagon, called me in one day and said, Robin, or Colonel Olds, Said, I'm sick and tired of these studies you're forwarding to me about our lack of tactical air capability. I want you to understand, Colonel, and get it through your head. We are never again going to fight a conventional war.
That was in 1962, just about the time the first American Army forces were deploying into Vietnam. In 1966, Olds, then 44 years old, was angling for a combat assignment when he got what might, in other circumstances, have been good news. He was on the list for promotion to general.
Now what am I going to do? I don't want to be a general. Because the war was just heating up over there in Southeast Asia, and I missed Korea. I was damn well not going to miss this one.
Olds' only option was to find a way to get himself off the promotion list. To that end, he staged an impromptu, low-altitude aerobatic demonstration just outside of London. Sure enough, Olds' commander called him in.
He pulled out a piece of paper, waved it in my face, said, you can't see this, but that says you'll never be promoted. I think now we're getting somewhere. Then he waxed really furious and eloquent, and finally he shook his finger at me in utter rage. And he said, and you are the kind of Air Force officer that ought to be in Southeast Asia. And I jumped up and saluted him and said, thank you very much, sir, and walked out of the room. And he was still shouting at me.
Colonel Robin Olds, at the tender age of 44, was sent to command the 8th Tactical Fighter Wing based in Thailand. On the way over, he stopped off to see his old friend, fighter pilot Chappie James.
I overheard them talking, and he was offering my father a position in his wing in Thailand. He said, oh, really? You're going to Thailand? He says, yes, if you come over, you can be my operations guy. You can be the deputy commander for operations. And then when Colonel Garrison goes home, you can be the vice commander. What do you think about that? And he said, well, that's fine, but that wing is primarily a reconnaissance wing. He says, nope. He said, that's all going to change.
Olds arrived, and James wasn't far behind him. And the 8th Tactical Fighter Wing did indeed change.
He knew what he was getting into from his World War II experiences, and he knew the way the war was being fought in Vietnam, and he trained his people to fight that war, and he protected his people, which was a large part accounted for the success they had as a wing.
The two officers drilled their pilots in air-to-air tactics and demanded of them the same steely discipline they demanded of themselves.
And they became known as Black Man and Robin. And they shot down more MiGs in one day, more enemy aircraft in one day in the famous Operation Bolo, Bolo MiG sweep as they called it, than any other organization did.
Olds flew an incredible 152 combat missions in Vietnam. He shot down 4 North Vietnamese planes, bringing his lifetime total to 17.
I asked him once whether he really had the rumored 5th MiG, and his quote was, and this is a quote, "I choose not to answer that question." And the reason for that is that he had been told that when he got the 5th MiG, and it looked like he was going to, that when he got the 5th MiG, they were going to bring him home. And Robin Olds is a fighter pilot, and he wanted to stay with his wing. He wanted to stay in the war, in the fight, and there has always been a suspicion he may have gotten the 5th plane. Nobody really knows but him, I guess.
He came home disgusted with the failure of his government, but inspired by the accomplishments of his men.
They were proud of themselves. They had every right to be. We were doing what we were told, and we were doing it well. And we admired, respected, loved one another. It was a very tight, wonderful unit. Still is to this day. Nobody felt sorry for himself.
Olds returned to the United States in 1967 and took over as Commandant of Cadets at the Air Force Academy. There he became a living symbol of the Air Force, a direct tie between its origins in World War I, where his father served, and the era of missiles and laser-guided munitions.
He did have a major impact on a whole generation of fighter pilots who met him at the academy. He inspired a lot of people who would later go on and fight in the Vietnam War.
I loved being in the Air Force. I loved the responsibilities that came my way. I met them head on with everything I possessed given to the jobs that I had. I wouldn't change that for anything.
The F-4 Phantom II is a versatile tactical fighter. It can be used as a fighter bomber, interceptor, or as an air superiority fighter. To gain and maintain air superiority is, in part, the mission of the Tactical Air Command. F-4 pilots assigned the specific mission of seeking out and destroying enemy aircraft in the air and on the ground must understand and be proficient in aerial combat maneuvering. Air-to-air combat is a swift and deadly game. Victory or defeat may be decided in only a few seconds. Mission success, and usually your life, depend upon a thorough knowledge of your weapons and weapon system, as well as those of the enemy. Pilots assigned combat duty will be exposed constantly to situations where only the most skillful maneuvering, teamwork, and timely application of basic air combat tactics will enable them to emerge victorious. Applying the F-4 in air combat tactics training, as well as in combat itself, demands an ability to maneuver the aircraft at maximum performance. To do this, the pilot must have an understanding of adverse yaw and dihedral effect. Adverse yaw is defined as yaw that is opposite to the desired direction of turn. At subsonic speeds and high angles of attack, rudder must be used in the F-4 to offset this yaw. This yawing moment is caused in part by the aileron on the top wing, left wing in a right turn, being deflected down and causing more drag than the spoilers on the low wing, because these spoilers are operating in a lower pressure area. One example of dihedral effect, and perhaps the easiest to understand, is the characteristic of any swept-wing aircraft to obtain more lift from a wing that is straightened out into the relative wind. The opposite wing is, in effect, swept further back. For this reason, the F-4 can be rolled with rudder. When performing a hard turn, as angle of attack begins to increase, the pilot may be tempted to tighten the turn by using more aileron. This adds to the undesirable condition, and if these improper controls are held, a snap roll-away from the desired turn may result. This could be disastrous in combat. To prevent a snap roll or post-stall gyration, the pilot must, when subsonic at high angles of attack, use rudder to control roll rate and bank, hold the ailerons neutral, and control turn rate with backstick pressure. Caution! Develop a feel for the rudders. Do not arbitrarily jam full rudder in the direction of turn, or dihedral effect will cause a roll in the direction of applied rudder. With proper training, the F-4 pilot will have no trouble in developing a feel for his aircraft and flying it to maximum performance. Remember, you are flying the airplane, not riding. The basic fighting unit is the two-ship element. It is much more maneuverable than a flight of four. The leader must, however, spend a great deal of his time clearing the wingman rather than looking for potential targets. When the element is used as a part of a flight of four, the wingman flies a position 1,000 to 3,000 feet out from the lead, depending on altitude, and from line abreast to 20 degrees back. Flying this position, the wingman can cover the leader's 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock area through the rear hemisphere, his primary area of responsibility. During turns, the wingman maneuvers in the horizontal and vertical planes. By playing the outside as well as the inside of the turn, the wingman can easily maintain position, conserve energy, and provide visual coverage in the rear hemisphere. When on patrol, the wingman stays well forward in easy view of the leader. He maintains coverage in the rear hemisphere while the leader searches for the enemy. The distance between aircraft may be increased at higher altitudes due to increased enemy missile performance. This increased separation extends visual coverage in the rear hemisphere, moving the blind spot farther out. Upon initial contact with the enemy, the wingman must move to the maximum performance maneuvering envelope. The size and shape of this envelope varies, but generally, it is a cone 60 degrees to 90 degrees from the leader, and 1,000 to 1,500 feet back. These distances and angles may vary as long as the wingman is able to provide mutual support and visual coverage during violent maneuvers. The primary duty of the wingman while flying in the maximum performance maneuvering envelope is to provide coverage in the rear. To maintain position and to perform his duties, the wingman will need a degree of skill and proficiency which is gained only through practice. When flying in the maximum performance maneuvering envelope, the wingman provides the leader with a spare weapon system, should his own malfunction.
My gun's jammed. Take him, too.
Should this occur, the wingman moves forward, assumes the lead, and maintains whatever advantage the leader may have had. If at any time the wingman cannot perform his duties, he should notify his leader immediately. The offensive potential of the two-ship flight is greatly enhanced when it is used as part of the basic combat patrol formation. This is a four-ship flight comprised of two mutually supporting elements. In this formation, the leader plans the attack and engages the enemy. The number 3 man, or element leader, supports the flight leader and assists in the attack. The number 2 and 4 men support their respective leaders and cover the vulnerable 6 o'clock areas. Since the element leader functions as alternate flight leader as well as leader of his own element, he is selected for his demonstrated leadership, ability, and aggressiveness. The supporting element is flown 3 to 9,000 feet out from the leader, and 0 to 5,000 feet up. These distances will depend upon altitude, configuration, and mission requirements. This is because of decreased enemy missile performance in denser air and the difficulty in seeing camouflaged aircraft at low altitudes. Visual contact must be maintained. While on patrol, the element leader may maneuver his element from a position of line abreast to a maximum of 10 degrees back. During turns, the element maintains this position by energy-altitude trade-offs. Generally, this type of maneuvering will require one crossover for every 90 degrees of turn. The leader will usually turn 90 degrees or in 90-degree increments. If not, he'll inform the element leader so that he may plan his crossover so as to be in correct formation position when the leader rolls out. There are 2 points that deserve special emphasis. First, wherever possible, the supporting element is flown down sun. Second, great care must be taken when crossing over in the fluid 4 formation to prevent mid-air collision during the brief periods of reduced visual contact. Correct employment of visual search techniques by each member of the flight will provide good detection rates at ranges of 3 miles or more in the rear hemisphere. The flight leader searches the forward hemisphere from 15 degrees above the horizon downward. The lead also makes casual checks of his element and its rear area. The element leader, in addition to maintaining his position, searches the forward hemisphere from 10 degrees below the horizon upward. The right wingman searches the area from the flight leader's 9 o'clock position to the rear as far as he can see. The left wingman searches the area from the support leader's 3 o'clock position to his rear as far as he can see. The use of small check turns will improve the 6 o'clock coverage by displacing the blind spot from side to side. Laxity in performing scan responsibilities cannot be tolerated. This is equally true in regard to radar search. Radar coverage in a flight of 4 is improved when each flight member searches a definite area with the minimum overlap. The lead aircraft selects 1-bar scan, radar mode, 50-mile scope, and adjusts the antenna elevation so that approximately half-inch ground return appears at the top of the scope. This radar search pattern supplements the leader's visual search area. The rear seat pilot maintains constant radar surveillance of his area. The number 3 man or supporting element lead selects 3-bar scan, radar mode, 50-mile scope, and adjusts the antenna to obtain half-inch of ground return on the lowest sweep. He then selects a 1-bar scan, thus automatically raising the antenna to the desired elevation. This radar search pattern supplements the element lead's visual search area. The number 3 rear seat pilot, like the lead rear seat pilot, concentrates exclusively on radar scan. The number 2 man selects 1-bar scan, radar mode, 25-mile scope, and adjusts the antenna so that half-inch of ground return appears at the top of the scope and maintains that search position. While the number 2 aircraft commander is scanning his visual search area, the rear seat pilot divides his time evenly between the radar and a visual scan of the same area scanned by his aircraft commander. The number 4 man selects 1-bar scan, radar mode, 50-mile scope, and adjusts the elevation strobe to 8 degrees up. He then selects 3-bar scan for search. The rear seat pilot in the number 4 aircraft, like the number 2 rear seat pilot, divides his time evenly between visual scan and radar scan. The number 4 aircraft radar scan area combined with the number 2 radar scan area provides a thorough long-range detection capability in the forward hemisphere when combined with the visual and radar scan of the lead and supporting element. It can be said that the air battle consists of 3 phases: acquisition, maneuvering, and terminal. Acquisition. You must find the enemy to engage him. Maneuvering. You must outmaneuver the enemy to destroy him. Terminal. You must know your weapons and weapon system to hit him. The F-4 has an excellent long-range air intercept radar. If properly used, this radar can be a decisive factor in the air battle. With this long-range detection capability, it is probable that contact will occur in the forward quadrant prior to visual contact. The problem of visual identification of bogies must receive special attention. Proper interpretation of radar returns can provide valuable information at sufficient range and time to allow the attackers to maneuver to gain tactical advantage prior to visual contact. When equipped with all aspect missiles and in a front hemisphere attack, separate the elements to achieve a first-pass ID and missile launch. A good rule of thumb to determine minimum contact range necessary to gain the separation for attack is approximately 3 times optimum missile range. For example, if optimum missile range is 5 miles, then minimum contact range is 15 miles. If contact is made at sufficient range, the ID element should make a descending acceleration using afterburner to 1.2 Mach. The launch element executes a barrel roll or S maneuver to obtain desired separation in minimum time. While gaining separation, the ID element wingman should make a thorough radar search of the area for other aircraft that could be a threat. The ID element lead maintains radar contact and maneuvers for a collision course. After allowing the ID element to gain the desired separation, the launch element also accelerates to 1.2 Mach and maintains a target lock-on while keeping visual contact with the ID element. As soon as visual ID can be made, the ID element lead relays to the launch element lead the identification of the target aircraft, and, if it is enemy, clears him to fire.
MiGs, 21s. No missiles on board. Clear to fire, clear to fire.
If the ID element is undetected passing below the enemy, or if the enemy fails to maneuver, the ID element should employ basic fighter maneuvers to re-attack or support the launch element. If, however, the ID element is detected and the enemy maneuvers against it, they may employ counter-maneuvers against the enemy or continue a straight-ahead run-out, while the friendly launch element sandwiches the enemy. When the ID is made and clearance to fire received, the launch element executes either a front or a rear hemisphere attack, depending on the enemy's actions. Both elements then engage the enemy, supporting each other until the enemy is destroyed. When attacking from a beam, the separation required is less, and it is easier to attain. On the initial visual identification pass, the ID element may fire if identification can be made soon enough. If not, he turns 180 degrees from the target's heading and maneuvers for a follow-up attack. The turn will put him out of the target area and allow the launch element a shot as they follow and maneuver for a missile or a gun attack. The two elements then fight as a team until the enemy is destroyed. In a stern attack, you must consider the range to target, fuel required to close, and your heading. A stern chase is useless if bingo will occur before identification or firing range. A stern approach, however, is the best position for surprise in a missile or gun attack. The elements in a stern attack maneuver so as to keep pressure on the enemy at all times and support each other until the enemy is destroyed. When operating as a lone element and attacking a flight of 4, make either a beam attack or a stern attack, since identification and re-attack are the most difficult from head-on. Be very careful to maintain element integrity when attacking as a lone element, since look-back from the F-4 is poor. After radar acquisition and initial attack, competence in basic fighter maneuvers is essential in destroying the enemy with either a missile or gun. The high-speed yo-yo is a good maneuver to maintain the advantage when on the attack. Its purpose is to maintain nose-tail separation. As you recognize an overshoot coming up, keep your G's on while reducing some of your bank. Slide high and inside the defender's turn. This will reduce your forward velocity while maintaining nose-tail separation. Watch your opponent and slide back down on the attack. Don't get the nose too low, or you may be forced out the bottom. The low-speed yo-yo is another good attack maneuver in the F-4. Lower the nose and establish your cutoff while nose low. Light the afterburner and accelerate to Mach 1.1 or more. Terminate afterburner and begin pull-up. When the nose is above the horizon, relight afterburner and slide up toward the defender's 6 o'clock. As you slide into your opponent's lethal cone, be prepared to perform a follow-up high-speed yo-yo. The barrel roll attack is an excellent offensive maneuver for a missile or gun attack. When the defender is turning into you while you are still at long range, 8,000 feet or more, and generating angle off, 40 degrees or more, begin the maneuver from low and inside the defender's turn. Play the rate of roll for the desired effect, depending on the range and rate of the defender's turn. If the defender is turning right, you roll to the left, and vice versa. Backstick and rudder is used throughout the entire maneuver to hold the nose in the desired position. Upon completion of the roll, you will find your angle off diminished and the range reduced. If G-load permits, fire a missile when in range. Press the attack and, if need be, execute another barrel roll attack or perform a high-speed yo-yo. While the fighter pilot and his aircraft comprise an offensive weapon, the possibility is strong that the first contact with the enemy will be in the rear hemisphere. This is due in part to the enemy's GCI capability. Thus, it is imperative that you have a thorough knowledge of both offensive and defensive maneuvers. The basic defensive maneuver is the defensive turn. This is a hard turn performed to prevent an opponent from achieving a launch or firing position. With this maneuver, the defender can diminish the lethal envelope and improve his position by rotating his cone of vulnerability away from the attacker. If the attack is discovered closer in, a break may be necessary. This is a maximum performance turn into the attack to destroy the enemy's tracking solution and force him to overshoot. The effect is gained in the first 45 to 60 degrees of turn. If the attacker does not yo-yo and overshoots, reverse, and if you're lined up, take a quick shot at him. If you are not lined up, get him out of phase and dive for separation. If an attacker has been forced to overshoot, another maneuver is the scissors. As the MiG overshoots, make a nose-high reversal and continue with a series of turn reversals. This will rotate your lethal cone away from the attacker and force him again to cross your flight path and eventually to your 12 o'clock position. The scissors is an effort to gain an offensive position. The advantage, however, lies with the aircraft having the shorter turn radius and the lower airspeed. For this reason, the scissors is not considered a good maneuver against the lighter, more maneuverable MiG series aircraft. After the first couple of reversals, if you cannot get a shot, watch the MiG. Get him out of phase with you, and when he cannot see you, roll rapidly. Engage the afterburner, pull the nose down to vertical, and accelerate out. Bear in mind, you need altitude for this. Should the MiG follow close in, you may set the hook. As he commits himself nose low, reduce power, extend speed brakes, and pull up at maximum performance. This should throw the MiG out the bottom. Roll off and drop in on him. If the MiG does not follow close in, do not set the hook. Accelerate out to at least Mach 1.1, descend to low altitude, and gain separation. A moderate 2G roll while descending should be enough to spoil the MiG's tracking solution on the way down. When on the deck, make random reversals to keep him from getting a tracking solution, while you use the F-4's advantage of speed at low altitude to outdistance the enemy. When out of gun range, stay low if you're still within missile range. When you are definitely clear of the MiG, then pull up and re-engage head-on. When a flight of 4 F-4s is attacked by 2 MiGs, the element under attack should separate either by a straight-ahead diving acceleration or by a turn away from the free element. The free element then quickly sandwiches the attackers. Again, be doubly watchful for additional MiGs in the area. If both friendly elements are under attack, it may be necessary to fight as lone elements until one element destroys his opponent and is thus free to assist the other element. When defending as a lone element, the defensive split is a valuable maneuver to use instead of the last-ditch maneuver. With the MiGs approaching gun range, for example 4,000 feet out, and remember, that is 4,000 feet out from the wingman, and you are unable to force him out of your lethal cone, call for a split. The low man continues his hard turn into the attack, while the high man slides high, gaining separation on the low man. The attackers are then forced to make a choice. Take the low man, take the high man, split, fake at the low man, and then take the high man, or perform the fluid separation. An analysis of past engagements reveals that the MiGs are unlikely to fake or perform a fluid separation. The defenders must be on the alert. If the attackers split, each defender then defends himself and fights alone until he's destroyed his opponent before he can assist the other friendly aircraft. If the attackers take the low man, he continues the hard turn and goes into a diving spiral to gain separation, while the high man zooms up, then drops down to sandwich the attackers once they're line abreast. Should the attackers take the high man, He performs a moderate G roll-under, ending in a turn away from the low man. The low man then pulls up and sandwiches the attacker as quickly as possible. It becomes readily apparent that teamwork and radio discipline are mandatory for the defensive split. Proficiency in fluid core and air combat tactics comes exclusively from training and practice. This proficiency is the only key to success. Air combat is a deadly game played for the highest stakes in the world. Your life and the life of your buddy. With so much to lose, there is no room for error. The knowledge gained in an aggressive air combat tactics program, combined with the skills developed in air-to-air gunnery training, will provide the tactical fighter pilot the tools necessary to engage and destroy the enemy in the fight for the sky. Good luck and good hunting.
If you could take the genes from the consummate military leader and combine them with the genes of the consummate fighter pilot, the result might look just like this. However, if you created a fictional military hero with Brigadier General Robin Olds' resume, an editor would likely reject it for being beyond believable. In 1942, Olds was an All-American tackle for West Point. In 1943, he was commissioned a second lieutenant and completed pilot training. He entered World War II flying a P-38 he named Scat-1. As he progressed through different iterations of fighter planes, he simply kept adding Roman numerals to the Scat name. He finished the war in a P-51 named Scat-7. In addition to becoming a double ace plus with 12 aerial victories, he destroyed another 11 1/2 aircraft on the ground. He later became the wingman on the Air Force's first aerobatic jet team. In 1966, he became commander of the 8th Tactical Fighter Wing at Ubon Royal Thai Air Force Base, Thailand. Robin Olds flew 152 combat missions in Southeast Asia in F-4 Phantoms, 105 of them over North Vietnam. He shot down 2 North Vietnamese MiG-17s and 2 MiG-21s. Robin Olds was famous for something else. He never learned to mince words or play politics with the mission of the military, as those in the Warbirds in Review audience learned when Olds described his return from Vietnam.
I got home about the last day of September, 1st of October, on a Friday. My family in Washington. And I'm on leave. Phone rang Saturday. Said, get over here to the Pentagon. Chief of Staff wants to see you Monday morning. I said, I'm on leave. He said, it doesn't matter. The chief wants to see you. I said, yes, sir. Okay. I reported into his office. He's the one that walked up to me and said, take off that mustache. Yes, sir. The next thing I knew, he briefed me, and I'm in the Oval Office of the White House. You know, God, me? LBJ was the president. So I'm sitting on the end of a couch. He's on an easy chair, and his aide, a colonel, Air Force colonel, was sitting on my right. And Mr. President said, welcome home, Colonel. You did well. Thank you very much, sir. Yeah, well, what's it like to be home? That was the weekend that thousands and thousands of hippies marched on the Pentagon. I said, sir, who are all those funny-looking people that marched on the Pentagon yesterday? And I'm going to quote for you folks. He said, I got 240,000 boys over there in Vietnam. When those boys come home, they'll tell the American public what's happening. And I said, wait a minute. Well, that's your job, not mine. Of course, you don't say that. So the best thing I could think of to come up with, I said, sir, I've been home since Friday. Been to a couple of dinner parties. No one asked me where I've been or what I've been doing for the past year. In case somebody does ask, what would you like me to tell them? I'm thinking, end of career. He glared at me and then he said, well, Colonel, you tell them, I'm quoting, that we are preventing the North Vietnamese from interfering in the democratic process in South Vietnam. I said, I'm sorry, sir, I can't say that. Well, why not, Colonel? Well, sir, if that's why we're there, I don't want to be the one that spreads the word. It was grim for a few minutes, but I hand the man full credit. He let me talk. He listened. And he sent me down the next morning to talk to his chief security advisor in the basement of the White House. We argued for a couple of hours. But this security advisor and I argued. At one point I said something. He said, we can't do that. That'll bring down the Chinese. I said, the Chinese and the North Vietnamese have hated each other for a couple of thousand years. They fought wars against each other. Haven't you read their history? No, he hadn't. So finally he said, what do you think we ought to do? And I said, for God's sakes, sir, mind the harbors, because everything they used came in by ship bottom. Gas, missiles, ammunition, everything, food. His response, when I said mind the harbors, was, we can't do that. That's an act of war. And mind you, this was about the 2nd or 3rd of October of 1967. I wonder if he ever wondered what the hell we were doing over there. Now, it was, I maintain we had every reason to be there, but we went about it improperly under the leadership of McNamara and Johnson.
Sadly, Robin Olds passed away on June 14th, 2007.
Across the Black River, the Red River, down the mountain chains to your target. So for the pre-strike, we went up. I said, Orange 5-6, this is Lincoln lead, tally ho. And this guy said, Lincoln, take the perch. And I said, what? He said, take the perch. And let me tell you what that told me. It told me this was a new guy from the States, probably his first mission, obviously out of SAC, following the rules. And I said, son, we don't take a perch around here. Just hold still. We'll be right there. What I didn't tell him was when we came up behind the tanker, each of us in F-4s is taking turns. It was in safe, but we're making sure that the growl of the Sidewinder coincides with the sight picture, and his sight picture is his engines.
Question.
He didn't know that. So we refueled, and everything's fine. Everything's fine. I stayed in a bit too long. Got in a fight with a bunch of MiGs, and I'm tapping the burners. Pretty soon I looked at the fuel gauge, and we are way below what we should have been. We had 3 bingos. Bingo. Hard bingo means you better get back to and then I can't say the word, but bingo. Which meant you better get to the tanker or you're in deep trouble. So I thought, Robin, you have really climbed deep in North 6. We never usually went out low. Fortunately, no SAMs. I call him, hey, Orange 5-6, head north. He says, Lincoln, I got a check with Brigham, ground. I said, Brigham is busy. Head north. I'll work the intercept, with the radar on the F-4. Well, finally, here he came. And I'm looking at my fuel gauge, and it's like this. My other 3 guys were low, but I was the worst. So we got the tanker, I turned him, plugged in, I relief. They finished. Now I came up for my full offload. Plugged in. He pulled the boom and stowed it. This is on one of those big tanker birds. And I said, hey, give me some fuel. This pilot said, no, we're bingo, RTB, meaning he was low on his fuel, returning to base, RTB. I said, wait a minute. I'm going to have to bail out of this airplane in just a minute or two. Give me some fuel. No, we're bingo. And I said, I knew from reading his, method of operation, he could fly from where we were over northern Laos all the way to the south of Thailand, turn left, and go to the Pacific, go to the Philippines, and loiter for 20 minutes. That was his bingo. And my fuel gauge was like this. So finally I said, okay, I got one Sidewinder left. I'm going to drop back about 2,000 feet. And before I ejection handle, I'm going to pull the trigger, so put your parachutes on. Boy, that boom came down. I plugged in. He started fueling me. My left engine quit. That's how low I was. I managed to hang on and get it started. He said, how much do you want? I said, fill it up. Which I didn't want because couldn't land with that much fuel. So I did a dirty trick, got my offload, pulled right up in front of him about 1,000 feet and hit the jettison switch. And got rid of half of that fuel. I said, you might need it. I said, sir, the MiGs are getting awful frisky, as you know. I have an idea of something we can do about it. He just grunted. And I said, oh, well, end of that. But 5 days later, I'm in his office. He said, okay, what's your idea? I said, sir, I want to plan a mission where I'll take my F-4s up there and we look like 105s. Because the MiGs love to tangle with the 105s. So we planned and planned and planned and planned. And pulled this mission off on the 2nd of January. Now the F-4, as you may have noticed, not in afterburner, but in full mill, leaves smoke trails. That's one factor. 2, a friend of mine named Donovan F. Smith in 7th Air Force said, Robin, I'm going to send you QRC 190s. Like you, what the hell is that? It's an ECM pod, a jamming emitter against their SAM sites, which the 105s had carried, but we never had. So there's a bit of deception. And then Mother Nature got in the act. Morning. Morning. Mother Nature got in the act and gave us a nice undercast so they couldn't see the smoke trails. So we did all this stuff, went down right over Fukien, nothing. Turned around just north of Hanoi, came back. My backseater says, I got one. Oops, went underneath. So I turned around and came back. Then here arrived my second flight. And the first transmission was, a lead, you got a MiG-21 on your ass. What a way to start a fight. But they all popped up through the clouds. They thought we were 105s, but nuh-uh. We were loaded for bear. And we got 7 of them. Found out I heard a transmission of their radio chatter. The lead says, whatever the ground said, hey, these aren't 105s, these are phantoms. What do we do? Well, there was great confusion. In the meantime, we're bang, bang, bang. That was fun. Yeah.
Another leading question, your interview with President Johnson. You're coming back to the States and
Do I have to? Do I have to?
No, sir, you don't have to.
But I will. We're talking about Vietnam, obviously. I got home about the last day of September, 1st of October, on a Friday. My family in Washington. I'm on leave. Phone rang Saturday. Said, get over here to the Pentagon. Chief of Staff wants to see you Monday morning. I said, I'm on leave. He said, it doesn't matter. The chief wants to see you. I said, yes, sir. Okay. I reported into his office. He's the one that walked up to me and said, take off that mustache. Yes, sir. The next thing I knew, he briefed me, and I'm in the Oval Office of the White House. You know, God, me? LBJ was the president. So I'm sitting on the end of a couch. He's on an easy chair, and his aide, a colonel, Air Force colonel, was sitting on my right. And Mr. President said, welcome home, Colonel. You did well. Thank you very much, sir. Yeah, well, what's it like to be home? That was the weekend that thousands and thousands of hippies marched on the Pentagon. Sir, and my daughter Chris had told me what hippies were. I said, sir, who are all those funny-looking people that marched on the Pentagon yesterday? And I'm going to quote for you folks. He said, I got 240,000 boys over there in Vietnam. When those boys come home, they'll tell the American public what's happening. And I thought, wait a minute. I mean, that's your job, not mine. Well, of course, you don't say that. So the best thing I could think of to come up with is, sir, I've been home since Friday. Been to a couple of dinner parties. No one asked me where I've been or what I've been doing for the past year. In case somebody does ask, what would you like me to tell them? I'm thinking, you know, end of career. He glared at me, and then he said, well, Colonel, you tell them, I'm quoting, that we are preventing the North Vietnamese from interfering in the democratic process in South Vietnam. I said, I'm sorry, sir, I can't say that. Well, why not, Colonel? Well, sir, if that's why we're there, I don't want to be the one that spreads the word. Ooh. It was grim for a few minutes, but I hand the man full credit. He let me talk. He listened. And he sent me down the next morning to talk to his chief security advisor in the basement of the Pentagon, of the White House. And we argued for a couple of hours. How come he gets to fly it and I don't? But this security advisor and I argued. At one point I said something. He said, you know we can't do that. That'll bring down the Chinese. I said, the Chinese and the North Vietnamese have hated each other for a couple of thousand years. They fought wars against each other. Haven't you read their history? No, he hadn't. So finally he said, what do you think we ought to do? And I said, for God's sakes, sir, mine the harbors, because everything they used came in by ship bottom. Gas, you know, missiles, ammunition, everything, food. His response when I said mind the harbors was, we can't do that. That's an act of war. And mind you, this was about the 2nd or 3rd of October of 1967. I wonder if he ever wondered what the hell we were doing over there. Now, it was, I maintain we had every reason to be there, but we went about it improperly under the leadership of McNamara and Johnson.
Here.
Yeah.
Hi, continue.
This is Marius Maxwell, Dr. Marius Maxwell. This is his airplane. This is actually the first time he's seen it in this paint job. And
it's beautiful.
Good job, yeah.
It's absolutely beautiful.
You want to tell us a little bit about this particular airplane?
Oh, well, I really would just defer to Robin Olds. I agree with everything he says always. It's a lovely airplane, 1947 P-51, and it's Scat 6, now and henceforth, and that's about all there is to say.
All right, thank you. We'll open it up for questions. If do you have anything else you'd like to say before we open up for questions, General?
I think I've already said too much.
No, sir, you never say too much.
Anybody got a question? Yo.
Yeah, I'll give it to you.
Thank you. I may have missed it in the introduction. What was your involvement in Korea? Obviously, you were in World War II, got 13 kills, Nam, 4 more or more. What were you up to in Korea? Thank you.
I had a squadron of 86s. They're drawing pilots from us. My name headed every list. Turned down every time. I never knew why. I blamed the colonel that I worked for. Took me 20 years to find out. My wife then was doing a television show in New York City. I mean, she was an actress. Her mother. The backer was a very powerful, wealthy man whose friend was the Secretary of the Air Force. The backer told the Secretary, don't let him go. It took me 20 years to find that out. And I don't think you knew that, Chris.
Yes, sir.
Where? Somebody else of the P-38 pilot. They put aileron boost on the airplane later, but we never had it. But it would roll just as fast as you had to roll it under whatever circumstance. As a matter of fact, I prided myself as being a pretty good P-38 pilot, and I could whip a P-51 down low. You know. Oh, a story about, this is kind of amusing to me. People often ask me, said, wasn't it wonderful to fly a P-38 with those 2 engines? And I said, boy, it sure was. I came home 5 times on single engine, all shot up. Love that bird. But you know the strangest thing? I flew another tour in P-51s. I came home single engine every day. Yeah.
General, you've had an incredible career flying a variety of different aircraft. What was your favorite aircraft that you flew over the years?
Well, I have to add the F-4, but the many years in between. I love that bird.
General Olds, just a quick question. In World War II, was your more feared adversary the 109 or the 190?
I didn't fear either one of them.
What was your preferred?
Don't get out in front of me. No, sir, I know you're asking a serious question, but you know, in combat, you don't have time for that kind of analysis. You're fighting another human being, which you don't think about, another machine. And you try to anticipate what's he going to do next, which way is he going to go. So in a big fight, there's danger from being shot at. There's danger from collisions. Okay? Those are the 2 worst, as you know. You try to get your people to fight as a team, but it doesn't work. You're lucky if your wingman can hold on. It takes an extraordinary wingman to follow the violent maneuvers. And pretty soon you do get split up. And in World War II, we got split up almost every fight. You go home with one or two, or one. I never saw 110 or, a 410 except on the ground.
Next question.
Okay, hold on. That's I'm very. When you're engaged, do you ever watch the controls of the other aircraft that you're engaged with? That's how dumb I am. Okay.
Answer: no. Technically, maybe too far away, but combat-wise, you're anticipating his move, depending upon your relative position. I mean, if he's behind you, you can't see. You don't want that. If he's out here in a turn, God, if he turns back that way and you're trying to turn inside him, if he goes like that, you got him. So then it's who can turn the tightest, okay? So you don't really think that way. You know what he has to do. Well, it's like one day going in, you mind if I make a story out of this?
No, sir.
I was commanding the 81st Tactical Fighter Wing in England. Been there a year and a half. Been a colonel for a long time. The phone rang. Somebody from Washington. Almost whispered, "You're on the list," meaning I was going to be a general. This is 65. I didn't want to be a general. I wanted to go to Southeast Asia. I missed Korea. I'm going to go to Southeast Asia. What can I do? I can't tell the Air Force I don't want to be a general. They'll say, okay, fine, get out. I know. I'm going to make that boss of mine so mad. He'll take me off the list. He'll want to court-martial me. Then I'll go to Southeast Asia. So I got 3 guys. We put on a formation acrobatic demonstration in F-101Cs. That's a single seat bird. Sorry, excuse for wings. But I had done that sort of thing on the very first jet acrobatic team back in '46. I was wingman. So I kind of knew what I was doing. We put on a wonderful show. Bomb burst, the whole 9 yards. Well, my boss heard about it. I bet his missile badge burned him. So I called down to London, chewed out, tore up my Legion of Merit. My effectiveness report was all wrong. He waved a piece of paper in my face and said, "And this says you'll never be a general." And I thought, oh, now we're getting somewhere. And he chewed and waggled his wattles at me. And finally, in the most disgusting voice, he said, "And you are the kind of Air Force officer that ought to be in Southeast Asia." And I jumped up out of the chair and said, "Yes, sir. Thank you very much, General." About face and left, and he's still shouting at me.
Got one more question over here, Robin.
Wait.
Oh, you're not done.
Told you it would be a long one. So we're going up the Gulf of Tonkin one day. I've got a backseater named Steve Croker. Turned inbound at Kep, headed for the Northeast Railroad. We got hit by about 16 MiGs. There were 8 of us. Roundy round, longest dogfight I was ever in. Got one early. Lead was doing figure 8s down. I could see him down below us. So I told everybody, get out, RTB, bingo. Made a circle to see if my guys got out. Then I left, and I thought about that guy. I said, nope, going back in. Went back in, about 25 feet, and there he is. Headed for his base, but there's a little range of hills. And I told the backseater, I said, "Stevie, you watch him. He's got 3 choices. He can bail out, he can hit that ridge, or he can get over the ridge and give me some airspace and I'll get a Sidewinder. He chose the latter, Sidewinder, boom, down he went. I plugged into that tanker with 300 pounds of fuel left. Oh, now that was a disconnected story because I forgot why I was going to tell you about that goddamn general.
Sam, this gentleman's been patiently waiting over here, Sam, to your right.
Oh, okay.
First of all, I want to thank you for the service you give to our country. And I've always wondered about the 51 versus the ME-109. Could he outturn you, or could you outturn him in a dogfight?
Good. I hope you all heard the question. I wish I could answer that question. I honestly think it depended upon the pilot in the cockpit. The birds were fairly equal. As
France? No. Was he I think he died in France flying out of reconnaissance 38.
Yeah. He worked for a friend of mine. I'm sorry, what was the question?
General, please finish the story about the goddamn general.
It was a couple of years after that encounter, and I'm now a commandant of cadets at the Air Force Academy with a baby star up here, one. And I'm talking to my old boss, 4-star General Spike Momeyer, who was 7th Air Force Commander in Saigon. Another friend, 3 stars, he was then commanding a training command, George Simler. Both of those gentlemen, of course, had spent their time in Southeast Asia. So while we were talking, here came the general from London that had chewed me on, waddling across the floor. And I said, excuse me, sir. Now, I know that both of these gentlemen had read my derogatory file because it's rather thick and good reading. And excuse me, sir. Oh, General Hardy, how nice to see you again, sir. You remember that magnificent chewing out you gave me there in Ruislip back in 1965? Oh, yes, sir. These two, 4-star, 3-star, are kind of listening. I said, sir, you told me something that day that I've always wondered about. You said I was the kind of Air Force officer that ought to be in Southeast Asia. And I've wondered ever since, in your estimation, what kind of Air Force officer should not be in Southeast Asia. I thought Simler was going to fall on the floor laughing. And even Momeyer laughed, which I'd never heard before. As General Hardy whirled about, red-faced, walked away, I reached between these two gentlemen and said, "Gotcha!"
All right, folks. Thank you for coming, and please stand up and give this true American hero a hand here.
I took a hit through the hinge on this door, and the door flew back like a flap. And I wonder, why won't the airplane go, And I'm dragging this thing just like a big flap. I got as far as Brussels, landed, saw what was wrong, had to take the door off. The hydraulic jack was bent, so I took it off, found a fitting on a wrecked airplane, and put the hydraulic lines together like this. Yeah, now I'm just a pilot, okay? Filled it up with hydraulic fluid, took off, the gear handle wouldn't move. What I had done was but 1,200 PSI against each other. So there wasn't much response when you tried to move something. I got back to base, my maintenance officer said, "What was your hydraulic pressure?" I said, He said, well, you do know where the gauge is, don't you? He said, it's down there right on the lower panel. I said, oh, is that what that is? Thank you all very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert.
Okay. Thank you so much.
In the 1960s, a revolution swept through America, reshaping the conduct of warfare. The reins of conflict shifted from the hands of generals to those of politicians.
We do not find it easy to send the flower of our youth, our finest young men, into battle.
Vietnam served as a brutal crucible for testing this novel approach. The Air Force discovered it was ill-prepared for such a conflict, gaining hard-earned lessons along the way. This narrative delves into the experiences of the United States Air Force. During the tense Cold War era of the 1950s, the Strategic Air Command's formidable bomber and missile fleets enforced Pax Americana. However, when actual combat erupted in Southeast Asia, these powerful weapons proved inadequate. In the early 1950s, France held sway over the Indo-Chinese region, grappling with the communist Vietnamese forces. The Communists gained ground steadily, pushing the French forces back from one stronghold to the next. In March of 1954, the French found themselves in a dire situation during the disastrous battle at Dien Bien Phu, prompting them to seek direct US involvement. Briefly, the prospect of using US atomic weapons was entertained. Ultimately, no action was taken. Dien Bien Phu succumbed to the Communist forces under General Giap's command. This defeat compelled the French to withdraw from Indochina. According to the terms of the 1954 Geneva Protocols, Vietnam was partitioned along the 17th parallel. The Democratic Republic of Vietnam, backed by China and Russia, occupied the north, while the Republic of Vietnam, supported by the United States, controlled the south. It seemed as though the Indochina theater had inherited the same complexities as the Korean conflict of the late 1940s. President Eisenhower officially recognized the elected government of the Republic of Vietnam and pledged support. Embracing the domino theory, Eisenhower believed that without intervention, all Southeast Asian nations would succumb to communism, mirroring the North Vietnamese advance.
Here at home, unassisted, Vietnam cannot, at this time, produce and support the military formations essential to it.
To prevent this, the United States committed to bolstering South Vietnam through military aid and training, aiming to halt the spread of communism. On October 11, 1961, President Kennedy authorized the deployment of a segment of the USAF Jungle Gem Combat Training Squadron to South Vietnam, codenamed Farmgate. Their primary objective was to train and equip the Vietnamese Air Force. By 1962, the Vietnamese Air Force consisted of 6 squadrons and 97 poorly maintained aircraft. Under Farmgate, the Vietnamese Air Force expanded into a formidable force, boasting 14 squadrons and 285 planes by 1965. Yet despite this growth, it remained insufficient, a realization that dawned on policymakers. The advisory phase transitioned into direct involvement by the USAF, plunging America into war. In the spring of 1965, Viet Cong activity surged, marked by a mortar assault on Bien Hoa Air Base, resulting in the destruction of 5 Martin B-57s. Simultaneously, the American embassy in Saigon came under attack. Clad in black pajamas, Viet Cong insurgents engaged in conventional battles with South Vietnamese forces. In response, the US opted to deploy USAF tactical air power directly, targeting infiltration routes in Laos and objectives in North Vietnam. The Air Force recommended that if America was forced into a contest with North Vietnam, there was a quick solution. A decisive bombing campaign targeting 94 key industrial sites could have crippled North Vietnam's ability to wage war. During that period, North Vietnam lacked the intricate defense infrastructure of surface-to-air missiles, anti-aircraft systems, and MiG interceptors it would later develop. The only conceivable path for the United States to lose in Vietnam was through massive ground troop deployment. Conversely, victory could have been achieved through overwhelming aerial bombardment.
And with your permission, therefore, I'd like to tell you something.
In the early 1960s, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara imposed a managerial approach akin to that of a prodigy on the Pentagon. McNamara, a virtuoso of quantitative analysis, held sway as the paramount figure in number crunching. His ability to recall statistics was legendary, and he was ruthless in challenging any erroneous information presented to him.
10 of the types of planes which are operating off our carriers today in the South China Sea, because it was then that
He advocated for the procurement of military hardware based on statistical analysis, a perspective not universally embraced by military experts.
When I graduated from National War College, apparently I was a #1 draft choice, so I was drafted up on the staff of Secretary Robert McNamara, who it was said about he knew the cost of everything and the value of nothing, and I learned that very well.
Transitioning from procurement to employing mathematically elegant techniques for military operations was a natural progression. However, McNamara overlooked a fundamental truth. The corporate notion of a bottom line does not seamlessly translate into the life and death decisions inherent in military matters. This oversight profoundly impacted America's ability to achieve success in the war.
How would they have ever won World War II if they'd had direction like that? It was, McNamara set the Air Force back 15 years, maybe 30, I don't know.
Additionally, McNamara disregarded the counsel of General Curtis LeMay, the architect of SAC's atomic defense, who now served as the Air Force Chief of Staff, albeit reluctantly.
And he admitted he wasn't a very good chief. It just wasn't an environment. It's a committee action, a discussion back and forth. He was a marvelous commander, but he would say not a good chief. He was frustrated during that whole time period.
I'm sure you realize that.
By 1964, advancements in technology enabled real-time monitoring of global events from Washington, D.C. This capability empowered the Commander-in-Chief to issue directives directly to field operatives on a daily basis, a tantalizing prospect for many leaders. For Lyndon Johnson, it proved irresistible.
That the people of South Vietnam shall have the right of choice, the right to shape their own destiny in free elections.
In World War II in Korea, the government had set broad policies for the military to fulfill in the conduct of military operations. In Vietnam, the government exerted daily control over military operations, dictating targets during attacks and even specifying the ordnance to be deployed.
You know, President Johnson getting personally and deeply involved in what the airplanes would take. I've been sitting on the ramp and they stopped us and changed our ordnance load, and the order came down from the White House. I mean, you can't micromanage that way.
While communication was swift, orders originating from the White House had to navigate through various headquarters, including the Pentagon, the 13th Air Force in Hawaii, and the 7th Air Force in Saigon. By the time directives reached the battlefield, the situation often had shifted drastically, partly due to leaks to the Viet Cong. This led to wasted missions and deadly ambushes. The Department of Defense and the White House established a complex and fluid set of rules of engagement, subjecting military actions to short-term political considerations. One notable strategy was a policy of graduated response, characterized by measured escalation in response to provocations.
Besides, we seek no wider war. Our response will depend upon the action of the aggressors, in this case, the North Vietnamese. The key to the situation remains the cessation of infiltration from the north.
The rules that the politicians geared up for us in North Vietnam just made no sense at all. They were sending all these, they thought, subtle but profound signals that weren't, but the North Vietnamese looked on them as a sign of weakness, and they were right.
From the comfort of Washington officers, it was decided that air operations should convey a political message rather than inflict devastating damage. The war would unfold through signals, placing the burden on the shoulders of servicemen and women from all branches to compensate for the perceived failures of both civil and military leadership. They would strive to perform admirably under adverse conditions, only to find themselves scorned by the public for fulfilling their duty.
For whatever reason, we were there. And we had American young men there, many of which were conscriptees, 55,000 of whom gave their lives. They risked everything they had and they lost it. And I read in Mr. McNamara's book that he said, the President and I got many, many recommendations from the Joint Chiefs of Staff, all of which had a paragraph about the risks involved. And in every one of them, there was the risk of intervention, the risk of attack, the risk of exploiting, the risk of that and the other. And so McNamara said, the President and I had already agreed that we weren't going to take those risks. You can't persist long in asking your young men, and now your young women, to risk everything they have in war if the nation that's putting them in that position isn't willing to share their risks.
On August 5, 1964, North Vietnamese torpedo boats purportedly attacked US ships in the Gulf of Tonkin. In response, 2 days later, Congress passed the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, expanding the president's authority to retaliate against North Vietnam. This led to the deployment of B-52s to Andersen Air Force Base in Guam. KC-135 tankers were dispatched to Okinawa, while the B-52s were initially held in reserve as Rolling Thunder, a bombing campaign commenced in the north. This operation primarily utilized Republic F-105 Thunder Chiefs, supersonic fighter bombers renowned for their heavy payload capacity. Affectionately dubbed the Thud, the F-105's nickname humorously highlighted its sizable dimensions and weight. Under America's self-imposed rules of engagement, there were certain constraints on targets during Rolling Thunder missions in the north. Military traffic on roads, bridges, rail lines, and radar installations were permissible targets. But striking surface-to-air missile sites or visible MiGs on North Vietnamese airfields was prohibited. Furthermore, North Vietnamese dikes, crucial for water management in rice paddies, were designated as off-limits. Consequently, the rice paddies became a favoured site for North Vietnamese anti-aircraft batteries. Washington wanted the war to be contained without killing any Russian and Chinese advisors at the airfields and missile sites.
We would find an area that had all been outlined like this. You could see the ring, and the minute they drew that ring, you knew they were putting up a SAM site there. And they would put SAMs all around the ring so that if one was being attacked, the other ones would be firing at you. And we could see that they were doing that. What they were doing, they were building the SAM site, putting in the stuff, and we'd report it and request permission to attack it. Can't attack it. Might be Russian. The Russians are helping the Vietnamese, and the Russians maybe. We'd send a wire back and say, so there's a Russian there. He knows it's a combat zone. What the hell is the problem? Let us go after. Nope. That's off limits. And then a month later, that damn SAM site would be up and would be firing, and then we would get direction to go in and hit it. Now instead of taking care of it easily and not losing anybody, you go in there and probably lose at least one airplane trying to knock that whole SAM site out, and maybe not even do it.
And next thing we know, we got not only MiG-15s and 17s and 19s, we got MiG-21s in the equation, and it got to be a very sporting course.
MiGs were off limits for attack unless they displayed hostile intent by maneuvering to initiate an assault. Over the subsequent 2 years, the USAF and Navy intensified their efforts under Rolling Thunder, conducting nearly 170,000 sorties and dropping hundreds of thousands of tons of bombs, resulting in the deaths of almost 30,000 civilians. In response, the resilient North Vietnamese dispersed their facilities and bolstered their imports of arms, petroleum and food from Russia and China. American bombing ceased in 1968, intended as a signal of willingness to engage in negotiations with the Communists.
By 1968, it was apparent that we were not there to win. We were not allowed to win. Rules of engagement, tremendous restrictions. There were times when we were fired upon, we could not fire back, airspace, border requirements. And it was extremely discouraging, particularly when we were losing people every day. We were not allowed to do what we were trained to do, what we were capable to do, what the airplane was capable of doing.
However, North Vietnam utilized this pause to enhance their air defense capabilities, importing Soviet equipment and advisors, and fortifying their defenses with 40 surface-to-air missile sites around Hanoi alone. They also introduced MiG-21 fighters armed with atoll missiles, analogous to the American Sidewinders. The North Vietnamese sustained the Viet Cong and their own regular units by supplying them through a network known as the Ho Chi Minh Trail. This intricate system comprised roads, rivers and paths concealed under a dense triple canopy of jungle. Utilized by guerrillas for centuries, the trail's straight-line distance from Saigon to Hanoi was approximately 600 miles, but its actual length was far greater, meandering through Laos and Cambodia and occasionally crossing into South Vietnam. Thousands of Russian-built ZIL trucks transported up to 5 tons of supplies each, while bicycles carried sacks of rifles and individuals bore sacks of rice.
We forlornly tried to interdict the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which was absolutely impossible, up in northern Laos and so forth. And then, of course, we did some in-country work when someone thought they knew where some Viet Cong were, and you usually end up strafing trees.
When US attacks temporarily disabled bridges or roadways, laborers manually transported the materials to the next point, exhibiting tireless determination akin to a trail of ants with their burdens.
We couldn't operate effectively at night. So the night was the time of sanctuary for the adversary. That's the time they reconstituted, repaired, regrouped, got ready for the next day.
In his belief in the power of technology, Defense Secretary McNamara authorized $2.5 billion to be invested in a system known as Igloo White. Igloo White consisted in part of airdrop sensors that detected troops or trucks by acoustic or seismic means. Information gathered was relayed to an orbiting aircraft, typically an RC-121 Constellation, which then transmitted it to Task Force Alpha for analysis and the mobilization of an appropriate strike force. However, Igloo White suffered from defects and limitations, notably the astute response of the Vietnamese. Upon spotting an acoustic sensor parachuting down, they would locate it and deploy a single truck to repeatedly pass by, creating the illusion of significant troop movements. Despite billions spent and millions of dollars worth of enemy supplies destroyed, the net quantity reaching the Viet Cong continued to rise. While public interest in the war mirrored that of the Korean conflict, focusing on air-to-air combat with MiG fighters, the victory ratio shifted in Vietnam. Unlike the 10-to-1 ratio in Korea, from 1965 to 1967, it averaged about 3.5 to 1, decreasing to 2 to 1 from late 1967 to 1968. The underlying truth was that pre-war combat training for US forces had not been sufficiently rigorous. There had been excessive focus on flight safety rather than adequately simulating the challenges of combat. As a result of tougher training implemented after 1968, the USAF victory ratio improved to 3 to 1, although it still fell short of the ratio observed during the Korean War. Furthermore, it did not match the remarkable 13 to 1 ratio achieved by the Navy in 1972, attributable to the rigorous training provided in the Top Gun program. Several factors contributed to the Air Force's comparatively low victory-to-loss ratio. One significant factor was the strict ground control exercised over the North Vietnamese People's Air Force, which avoided combat except under highly favorable conditions.
They like to get supersonic, either high or low, fire their ATOL heat-seeking missile, and dive away. And they learned that they didn't want to get in close.
The McDonnell Douglas F-4 Phantom, widely regarded as the premier fighter of the 1960s, was well suited for the demands of the Vietnam War. With its extended range, aerial refueling capability, high speed, and heavy payload capacity, it proved to be a formidable asset.
An airplane like the Phantom that had equipment in the back seat that was not in the front seat, that was designed to be operated by two people, it was a definite advantage to have two people under those conditions. Highly trained, both highly trained, and to be able to fly as a team all the time. Chuck DeBellevue and I flew over 100 sorties together. Chuck was the best of any of the backseaters at UDARN, and I was very fortunate to be able to select him to fly with me. We got to the point that we didn't have to say a lot to each other in the cockpit. I knew what Chuck needed, he knew exactly what I needed.
What the early Phantom could not do was dogfight effectively with the MiGs.
And the F-4 was not a dogfight machine. That was a big, huge monster with a tremendous amount of power, and it turned like a sewer cover.
The F-4 Phantom was not optimized for dogfighting. MiGs typically detected the larger F-4s first, often launching surprise attacks from behind, firing missiles from the 6 o'clock position before quickly disengaging.
Well, the MiG-21 was small, hard to see. It left very little smoke trail. It had a lower wing loading, which meant that it turned tighter than we, very important in an air battle. The F-4 in comparison, large, bulky. We left 2 big smoke trails when we were not in afterburner, so a flight of 4 could be seen 20 miles away.
Initially armed solely with missiles intended for anti-bomber operations, some pilots, like ace Steve Ritchie, achieved success, but for many, the missiles proved ineffective.
The MiG was in a high G turn. The first missile went through the center of the fuselage of the MiG, and the second missile went through the fireball. And on the second MiG, I only fired 1 missile because I thought we were out of parameters. We were too close, the angle was too great, and we had another absolutely perfect missile.
The 7th Air Force rule was you had to close on him until you could visually identify him, and then by that time you're inside the range of the Sparrow missile. Most of the time you might even be inside the range of the infrared missile. And so what you're left with now is a gun situation, and there's no gun on the F-4.
To address this, gun pods were hastily mounted on the centerline attachment point as a temporary solution.
That 20-millimeter gun and put a round about every 6 inches, and we come in there with two of those guns and just run the whole length of them, and just the boat, you could just see the boat. It would do like that, it would just fall apart, you know, just cut it right in two.
Between 1968 and 1972, air-to-air combat was minimal, with the F-4 primarily tasked with escorting bombers. Frequently paired with the Republic F-105 Thunder Chief, the F-4 compensated for its lack of dogfighting prowess by capitalizing on the Thunder Chief's capabilities. Despite its early reputation for accidents, the F-105 emerged as the pre-eminent fighter bomber in Vietnam. Renowned for its speed, it could penetrate North Vietnamese defenses, deliver its payload, and, if necessary, engage in dogfights, using its internal gun to combat the MiGs. The Republic F-105, affectionately known as the Thud, was a formidable aircraft, weighing over 50,000 pounds. Renowned for its speed and power, it served as a backbone of the Vietnam War effort, accounting for more than 75% of missions over North Vietnam. One such aircraft, Memphis Belle II, distinguished itself by downing 2 MiGs during its tour of duty.
We quickly found that we could, with conventional weapons and using some of the techniques that those of us who had had the opportunity to use in Korea were still familiar with and could teach and get other people to do. Using those techniques with conventional, dirty old 750-pound iron bombs, 6 of them hung underneath the belly, or 2,000-pounders on the wing, that we could do extremely precise bombing work with that airplane.
We're getting flagged up, target one, watch it.
When missions targeting Hanoi were authorized, dubbed Going Downtown, the Thuds led the way, both in bombing runs and in bearing the brunt of casualties.
Eagle flag, a lot of flag out southwest middle side. Roger, let's go get it.
The crews of these aircraft faced daunting odds, with only a 50% chance of surviving a 100-mission tour.
I can only describe it as the most eerie sensation I have ever had in my life. Between my wingman and myself, a guy named John Bobell, all of a sudden there is a roar that's beyond description, and incandescent light that just goes in through your eyes and right down to your stomach. It paralyzes everything. 2 SAMs came up between John and myself, and we're perhaps 50 yards apart.
Thuds and F-4s alike shared one of the war's most perilous and critical missions, the Wild Weasel mission, tasked with suppressing surface-to-air missiles. In North Vietnam, Wild Weasel teams adopted a daring tactic of presenting themselves as targets to locate SAM sites. Once the SAM radars locked onto them, the Wild Weasel aircraft would retaliate by launching radar-homing missiles to neutralize the radar installations.
Okay, these flags there. Let's get out of here to the southwest.
By the time we were halfway through my operation with Rolling Thunder, if you had to go in without ECM pod, or if you didn't have a Weasel flight along, you felt quite persecuted.
This mission was exceptionally perilous and demanding, requiring nerves of steel. Weasel crews would linger in the area even after the attackers had departed, living up to their motto, first in, last out. A vastly different aircraft, the Boeing XB-52, originally conceived as a high-altitude nuclear bomber for solo missions deep into the Soviet Union, unexpectedly emerged as a significant asset in Vietnam. Despite its age and intended purpose, the XB-52 found itself repurposed as an aerial artillery platform, flying alongside more modern aircraft formations and delivering conventional iron bombs. The transformation of this aircraft, initially designed for Cold War nuclear deterrence, into a workhorse of conventional warfare in Vietnam was unforeseen by both the Air Force and Boeing. Flying at 30,000 feet, B-52s operated undetected and unheard from the ground, their mere presence compelling the enemy to disperse their ground forces to avoid being decimated by carpet bombings. For B-52 crews, life became a monotonous cycle of briefing, flying, and sleeping, contributing to a sense of detachment from their actions that, combined with tension, fatigue, and boredom, gradually wore down morale. Crew members humorously referred to themselves as coconut knockers for the countless hours spent bombing the jungle below. Despite this, B-52s were widely regarded as the most dreaded weapon by the Viet Cong. By 1968, the United States recognized the need to disengage from Vietnam. Secret negotiations between the US and North Vietnam aimed to establish a framework for the Vietnamization of the war, whereby the responsibility for combat operations would gradually shift to South Vietnam. South Vietnamese forces would be so trained and strengthened that they would not require US support. On October 23, 1972, all bombing operations north of the 20th parallel were suspended. However, the North Vietnamese used this respite to repair infrastructure such as railroads and bridges, preparing for a significant offensive in the south. In response, US President Nixon opted for a decisive military campaign, aiming to compel the enemy to negotiate rather than persist in prolonged guerrilla warfare. This offensive was dubbed Linebacker II, and it saw the lifting of artificial rules of engagement. Linebacker II commenced with a relentless B-52 assault on Hanoi and Haiphong. Despite encountering heavy enemy defenses, the Strategic Air Command executed 729 sorties over 11 days, dropping a staggering 15,000 tons of bombs while sustaining only 15 aircraft losses. By the conclusion of the operation, North Vietnamese resistance had been severely weakened. Following Linebacker II, the North Vietnamese found themselves devoid of surface-to-air missiles, SAMs, and the means to deploy them. The relentless bombing compelled them back to the negotiating table, thus concluding the operation. Among the often overlooked heroes of the conflict were the crews of the Boeing KC-135 tankers, responsible for refueling attack aircraft mid-flight. Acting as a force multiplier, the KC-135s significantly augmented the effectiveness of fighters and B-52s, allowing them to operate with extended range and heavier payloads. Aerial refueling, however, posed significant risks. Tankers weighing 300,000 pounds and hurtling through the air at 500 miles per hour had to delicately rendezvous and make gentle contact with equally swift aircraft. The hazards were further compounded by factors such as night operations, turbulent thunderstorms, radio silence, and minimal lighting conditions. Nevertheless, tankers played a crucial role in enabling fighters to depart with fully laden armaments, refueling them mid-mission and providing assistance to damaged aircraft when necessary, including towing them within gliding distance of their bases. Throughout the conflict, KC-135s performed over 800,000 refuelings, transferring nearly £9 billion of fuel. Despite the grueling and perilous nature of their duties, the rewards for tanker crews were primarily psychological. A fighter pilot might express gratitude, acknowledging a save as they disengaged, recognizing that without the tanker's assistance, they would have had to abandon their mission. As a result, tanker crewmen rarely had to buy their own drinks on fighter bases. In Vietnam, visual reconnaissance regained the significance it held during World War I. The close-quarters nature of the conflict, with adversaries often fighting in their own villages, elevated the importance of visual reconnaissance to a critical level. but the USAF could not select its own target from reconnaissance photos. That was the responsibility of the Military Assistance Command Vietnam. Despite the challenges of command, the Military Assistance Command Vietnam, MACV, dictated the timing, location and method of reconnaissance missions. Despite the risks, reconnaissance crews ventured unarmed into heavily defended areas to capture vital photographs. Among the most intimate forms of reconnaissance was the Forward Air Controllers, FAC. Tasked with confirming enemy targets while avoiding harm to friendly forces, FACs flew low and slow over combat zones, vulnerable to a range of threats from thrown objects to anti-aircraft fire. Throughout much of the conflict, FACs piloted unarmed light aircraft like the Cessna 01, responsible for locating targets, calling in airstrikes, marking targets, and guiding attacks.
Okay, real fine. Okay, 6-1, I'd like you to put your bomb just short of 2.
All tasks requiring exceptional skill and courage. In the later stages of the war, fast-forward air controllers operating jet aircraft such as the F-100 and the F-4 conducted rapid reconnaissance in high-threat environments. Only the most seasoned veterans in peak physical condition could withstand the demands of this mission, which included 4 to 5 hours of low-level flight and high G turns. Service at the forefront of operations was invaluable, not only for hitting targets, but also for safeguarding innocent lives. In Vietnam, strategic airlift played a more pivotal role than in World War II or Korea, as the harbours and roads of Vietnam were unsuitable for the timely unloading of ships. 34 squadrons of the Military Airlift Command were dedicated to airlift operations. Initially, many of the aircraft employed were outdated Douglas C-124s. However, the introduction of the Lockheed C-141 in 1965 marked a significant enhancement in cargo capability. The C-141 could carry twice the cargo of the C-124 at double the speed and range. In 1969, the controversial Lockheed C-5A became operational. In total, 73 of these massive aircraft were deployed in service. Tactical airlift in Vietnam reached new heights with the introduction of the Lockheed C-130 Hercules, a robust 4-engine turboprop. These versatile transports operated extensively in the combat zone, with some analysts asserting that tactical airlift was even more crucial than the interdiction provided by tactical fighters. Transports played a vital role in ferrying troops and supplies to the front line, supporting major parachute assaults and sustaining the logistical backbone of the war effort. This demanding and relentless work continued day after day, requiring immense physical exertion and nerves of steel. Between 1967 and 1973, tactical airlift operations transported over 7 million tons of passengers and cargo within South Vietnam alone, a volume nearly 10 times greater than that moved during the entirety of the Korean War. One of the most formidable weapons employed during the Vietnam War was the side-firing gunship, a modification of transport aircraft. Born out of necessity and ingenuity, the aerial gunship was outfitted with cannons and gun ports, creating a potent platform for close air support. The concept behind the gunship involved executing pylon turns, with the pilot using a ground reference point to maintain a stable orbit around the target area. This allowed the side-mounted guns to accurately engage relatively stationary targets on the ground. The abundance of C-47 transport aircraft made them prime candidates for conversion into gunships. The resulting AC-47 gunships earned colourful nicknames such as Spooky, Dragonship or Puff, the latter inspired by the imagery evoked by the song Puff the Magic Dragon, referencing the dramatic display of flame and smoke produced when the guns were fired. As demand for gunships grew, faster and more modern aircraft were chosen for conversion, including the Lockheed AC-130, which further enhanced the gunship's capabilities. Like an ancient ship of the line, the Lockheed Martin AC-130 is truly an angel of death. It bristles with side-firing weapons from the 20mm Gatling guns to the 7.62 miniguns to the 40mm cannon. Collectively, the sheer volume of fire unleashed by gunships rendered them a formidable force on the battlefield, capable of exerting significant influence. These aircraft proved remarkably cost-effective both in terms of the destruction inflicted upon enemy assets, such as trucks, and in the lives saved while defending villages and outposts. Despite the inherent risks and isolation of their mission, the tangible rewards of safeguarding ground forces or disrupting enemy supply lines provided immediate gratification. Vietnam veterans, once marginalized by a vocal minority, are now rightfully recognized as the heroes they truly were, men and women who bravely fulfilled their duty in the face of immense challenges. Among the various missions carried out in Vietnam, none better embodies the spirit of selflessness and altruism than that of the search and rescue teams. Operating under the motto, "so that others may live," these courageous individuals willingly risked their lives day in and day out to retrieve downed aircrew members. By 1968, every aircrew member flying in Southeast Asia understood that if they were to be shot down, every possible effort would be exerted to rescue them, regardless of the obstacles posed by the location, cost, or impact on other ongoing missions.
And most people would have broken all of the rules. They would have done anything possible to rescue a downed colleague.
It was not until November 1964, after more than 20 aircraft had crashed or been shot down, that the first official trained search and rescue capability became available. As part of standard rescue operations, Douglas A-1E Sky Raiders, nicknamed Sandys in Vietnam, served as armed escorts. These aircraft were tasked with providing suppressing fire to deter enemy forces from approaching downed aircrew, while rescue helicopters conducted recovery operations.
Get through, go out, pick up the jollies and bring them in. 93, roger, we're on our way over. Follow me, jollies, follow me.
Introduced in 1965, the Sikorsky HH-3E helicopter, commonly referred to as the Jolly Green Giant, became a vital asset for rescue missions. These helicopters faced numerous challenges, including attacks by enemy aircraft and navigating through intense anti-aircraft fire.
Hold your hover. Hold your hover. Hold your hover. Taking out the slack. Hold your hover. Hold your hover. Hold your hover. 10 foot below the aircraft. 10 foot below the aircraft. Hold your hover, babe. Hold your hover. 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 Sliders at the door. Driver's coming in the door. Driver, finish secure. Let's get the hell out of here. Okay, talk to me. We're coming out. Go on, coming out. Coming out. Okay. Good ahead. Good ahead. Down that valley. Get low. Get low. Get low. Follow that valley, Jolly.
In the final search and rescue mission of the war, Air Force and Marine helicopters tirelessly conducted mission after mission to evacuate South Vietnamese patriots who were unable to confront the occupying forces. The United States Air Force entered the conflict in Southeast Asia under orders and withdrew in a similar manner.
In 8 years of the air war, we never really won air superiority. We would have air superiority conditional at times and places, but in terms of a general air superiority in 8 years, we never won air superiority.
It has nothing to do with whether we were there, whether we should have been there. We were there, and we fought the war in the wrong way. And we shouldn't hazard our people like that. That's primitive. That's the kind of conflict they did in the Dark Ages when armies slaughtered each other. 55,000 young men that didn't have to die.
Despite the senselessness of the entire intervention, valuable lessons were gleaned from the experience.
Make no mistake, we came out of the Vietnam War with an enormously deeply embedded, almost burned into our souls, set of lessons about our inadequacies. That is, about the deficiencies in our ability to do what we thought air power would be able to do, and what we certainly knew air power should be able to do.
The inherently flawed and politicized command structure that had led to disastrous outcomes would undergo significant reforms. A new generation of leaders, equipped with a thorough understanding of advanced technologies and tactics, would emerge, paving the way for more effective and strategic military operations in the future. The challenging and frequently harrowing ordeal of Vietnam left them better prepared to confront future conflicts.